Will they pass a budget or won't they? A deadline is just days away. That's next on CapitolView. Illinois is in its 11th month without a state budget, and by May 31st, legislators are tasked with finishing that up as well as getting a new spending plan in place for the 2017 fiscal year. So far, no compromise, but as we tape, talks are ongoing. I'm Amanda Vinicky, the State House Bureau Chief for Illinois Public Radio and your host for this edition of CapitolView. Joined by the Illinois Times, Bruce Rushton in green here and looking fab as ever, and WCIA Capitol Bureau Chief Matt Porter.
Thank you. Good to be here.
All right, so this is, as I noted, all fluid, but let's just start with the fact that Illinois, as I mentioned, has gone nearly a year without any budget deal. Matt and I know we just were at a Thursday afternoon meeting of the governor and the 4 legislative leaders, right, and the Republicans left with this, it seemed, renewed sense of optimism. You've had bipartisan groups of legislators meeting behind closed doors on the so-called turnaround agenda that Bruce Rauner has said has to be passed before he'll really work on a budget or consider a tax increase that would lead to a balanced one. Matt, what do you read out of this? Is there hope for a deal yet?
I think if you looked at what happened on Thursday, it was sort of body language not matching up with what they were saying, because they came out and essentially, if you were to read their quote on paper, says, you know, we've renewed talks with the Democrats, we're optimistic, the working groups are moving forward. But if that was the case, well, then they came out, they gave these statements for about 30 seconds each. Within a minute or two, they were done, and they took 0 questions from the media. They were shuffled off. And then the Democrats, there was not a single Democrat, not even Senate President Cullerton, who seems to like coming out and talking to the media. Neither Democrat showed up to confirm such optimism exists. So yes, the Republicans say there's optimism, the working groups are moving, but honestly, the Democrats had nothing to say to the media immediately after, and the body language and the fact that they took no questions seems to me that things are a little tougher than I think they want to make it believe.
It did seem to me, as you noted, the body language, both Senate Republican Minority Leader Christine Rodogno and her House counterpart Jim Durkin were stiff and not smiling. It wasn't like, we got a deal. That said, on Wednesday, Christine Rodogno had a similar take. There was yet another leaders meeting. The governor says he's going to call them daily. Who will show up or if that'll come to fruition, we don't know. But on a Wednesday meeting, House Speaker Michael Madigan left the governor's office saying he had told Bruce Rauner that his agents weren't being persuasive in these working groups and that he'd better try harder when it comes to working on a deal for workers' compensation, collective bargaining, trial limits, all of these things that have been toxic to Democrats. And afterward, you had the House vote on a budget. We saw on Thursday a redo of that because, wow, was there bedlam in the House chambers. Can either of you describe, first of all, before we get into the bedlam, there's your tease, just wait, what the House budget that was passed, so only Democratic votes and not all Democrats in the House passed this, now onto the Senate, and it is a $40 billion budget. Why might that be significant, $40 billion?
Well, I don't think it's insignificant. It's not soup. It can go to the Senate and they can approve it if they want to approve it. It's just going to get vetoed where there's no sign. Look, the fat lady doesn't sing at Camp David until both sides show up and shake hands, and that hasn't happened yet. And so until that happens, you know, this is just a more bad kabuki theater that's been dragging on for a year now. The same sorts of will they or won't they sorts of games were going on at the end of this legislative session last year. They didn't, and they're able to still kind of keep plodding on. And I don't see where there's anything, you know, right now the elections are a huge, you know, issue. I mean, it's not making things any less difficult. And when you look at the political, you know, the political stars, you know, it's just not in anyone's interest right now politically, I think, to be seen as caving in or you know, Rauner has plotted his course. It's going to be very tremendously difficult for him to say, I'm going to abandon the turnaround agenda. It's going to be very difficult almost now for Madigan to even throw him a bone, given what he said on Wednesday, saying this is not persuasive. That speaks volumes. That's the loudest thing that was said this week, I think.
And so this budget, just so that we can kind of get into some of those details, $40 billion when, of course, the state's revenues are
32.
significantly less than that, 32, 33 billion, depending on how you look at it. I mean, $1 billion here or there. Regardless, out of balance, and Democrats have admitted that they did that last year. By Republicans denouncing this as so out of balance. And this is a budget that doesn't even include spending, although that out of balance number does. It doesn't include all of the money that is being paid out to social service agencies, Medicaid and such, because of court order during this stalemate, where basically you've had a judge come in and say, regardless of what you politicians are doing, this has to be a function of the state, and it's keeping the money flowing at even higher numbers than it need be, perhaps, if Democrats and Republicans have worked out a budget. But is that kind of lending any proof to what Democrats say when they talk about a tax increase, or when Republicans say, hey, we're willing to go along with it, by saying, this budget is out of balance, and you have the governor's office saying it is impossible for me to line item veto this? Is that to say, well, yes, a tax increase is going to be on the horizon, period?
Well, and even Rauner has said that there's going to have to be, I'm not sure what nomenclature he's been using, but essentially he's admitted, look, we can't cut our way out of this. We're just too deep in. So he's been using terms like grand opportunity, or I don't know what
grand compromise.
The grand compromise, and that's code for, there's going to be a tax increase, and he admits it. I think the Democrats also probably realize that they can't, $7-8 billion out of whack. That's not reasonable either. There's going to have to be some sort of median in the middle. But I think that's perhaps just the Democrats, drawing their own line in the sand. If you're not going to, surrender workman's compensation and these non-budget items and the deal for a budget, we're not going to back away from our $40 billion, even though we know it's ridiculous. And so it makes sense from the perspective of it gives both parties good sound bites come November.
Well, I think it's also sort of a negotiation tactic. When I spoke to some of the Democrats after the decision to pass it and say, why pass this bill? It's so out of balance that Republicans aren't going to like. And they kind of said, look, if we can't get a compromise in the next 5-6 days, then this is the budget that's going to go to the governor's desk, and we're going to fulfill our duty of sending a budget to the governor's desk. So I think it's almost a dare to the governor to say, unless we can come to a compromise, this is the bill that's going to come to your desk. And this time the bill is all in one piece. Rather than, I think, the last time the Democrats separated it, really gave governor the opportunity to pick what he liked and what he didn't, and he ended up just taking the education bill. This bill is different. Here, it's all one 500-page bill, and it has $700 million more dollars for K-12 education. And whether or not Democrats think that's realistic, I think what they're trying to say to the governor is, you've saved education last time, kept schools open. Well, here's an even way more than you want. Are you going to veto it fully and delay school openings? Are you going to use your line item veto? What are you going to do? And I think partly this bill is a dare to the governor to say, let's see what you do next now that we put this on your doorstep.
Basically, you're the executive. Budget management is under the auspices of your office, so there you go. And calling his bluff, because we've had Governor Bruce Rushton say all along that he wants schools to be open no matter what, forget the rest of the stalemate, and that he wants them to have more money. So that brings us to this question of education funding. We have all sorts of competing plans at the State House. There's an Andy Menard version that totally redoes the funding formula. There's now a compromise version that blends that with one based on evidence-based funding. You have that is by GOP Senator Jason Barrickman. Then we have this House budget that basically just has schools funded as they are now, then takes a poverty grant and shovels millions of extra dollars towards schools, including Chicago Public Schools, which also gets extra money for its pensions. You have the state paying toward teachers' pensions and every other district but CPS. So, wow. Education funding really seems to be what is driving a lot of these talks, right?
Yeah, it's sort of the gun to the head issue maybe, because no one wants to get rid of education funding. Nobody wants to delay schools opening. You know, we've all talked about this past 11 months. What are the pressure points? What could get the governor and the Democrats, Speaker Madigan, to come to a compromise? And education might be one of those issues, because nobody wants to see these schools delayed. No one wants to see these schools stopped opening. And that's going to be a major issue for the governor if this is the bill that he gets. We obviously had thousands of students this week show up at the Capitol calling for some sort of funding reform, which they sort of seem to like Menard's bill, which would redistribute how the money's given. You know, Senator Menard has said the formula is 20 years out of date. You know, there are schools that have high instances of poverty that aren't getting enough money, and we need to divert more state funding to those schools and leave the other schools that are property tax rich to sort of handle it themselves. I think no matter what happens in the next few months, education might play a big role.
You know, I think Menard's done a fantastic job. I think most people would, in terms of promoting his idea and working hard to try to get some attention to it. And Lord knows he's gotten a lot of attention.
Oh, yeah.
That said, you know, at the end of the day, neither side wants to see the schools closed, which is why the schools didn't close, you know, when they weren't able to get a budget this time around. And so if they can get a change in educational funding formula, that's a huge bonus. That's a huge plus. That's great, you know, icing on the cake here. But we don't have a cake yet. And so the thing is that
there's nothing to ice.
There's nothing to ice. And so it seems in a sense a little bit cart before the horse, given that it's already been shown that both sides are you know, they'll play chicken, but they're not going to shut the schools down, because that hurts both sides.
Well, and Bruce, there's also, to me, the question of under the Menard plan, although it is a quote-unquote hold harmless so that no school district would lose in this immediate next budget year, eventually you would have suburban districts losing out on state funding, and he says this is a matter of equity. They don't need the money. They have the property wealth locally to make it up. Yeah. But heading into an election, when you have school superintendents, I mean, was never going to happen this year, or at least before November anyway? Talk about it in January, December?
Any way you paint the plan, it's a shifting thing where the haves are going to have to give some of what they have now to the have-nots, and that's just not going to play well in the haves districts. And so, you know, that's why it's such a, even if he delays it, which is, it's not going to happen right away, we're going to get you down the road, that's still not going to play. And so what he's up against here is that the state, for so long, and we've pounded away at this on the show for lots of times, we've got an antiquated tax system that's overly reliant on property taxes to fund the schools. The state doesn't have any money available to pay its share, and the reason why it doesn't have any money available to pay its share is that Illinois has a very regressive tax system that exempts large portions of the economy from paying a darn nickel, and so it's foisted on everybody else. That's what needs to be fixed before you can get the icing. That's the cake. This is the icing.
But we also need workers' compensation and trial limits and all these other changes, right? I'm speaking
and
for Bruce Brown,
sunshine on the 4th of July. That's great, you know. But right now we don't have anything. I mean, we don't have any of that, and we don't even have a budget. And so that, you know, if nothing else, the Democrats have been consistent saying it's the budget, stupid, and they're still saying it's the budget, stupid. And they signaled that very strongly by passing this recent one, saying it's a $7 billion problem. We need to solve it.
So this House Democratic budget, we will let you in on the tease that I talked about, this bedlam in the Illinois House chamber. So actually the House voted on it not once, but twice, once on Wednesday night and another time on Thursday morning, because there was a bit of I don't know if it was a screw up on Wednesday night, if it was trying to annoy House Republicans and for Democrats to use their power to get under the GOP's skin. Matt, do you want to explain what went on? Because it was interesting to watch. I've got a video.
And this was an unusual situation from the get-go. You know, the leaders' meeting happened earlier in the day, and then there were rumors that Speaker Madigan had his own budget plan already drawn up, ready to go. Suddenly it was in committee, then it was out of committee, then we heard...
Not even in committee. No, it's skipped committee. Bypass. Went straight to the floor.
Went straight to the floor. It's an amendment, and the Republicans say, you know, this is a 500-page amendment. You know, we haven't read it. They took some time off to sort of read it, I guess, only about a half an hour or so. Not sure what they were. And then they come back, and the debate begins on what is essentially a 2017 budget, $40 billion, almost $40 billion worth of spending. And the Republicans obviously started railing against the whole idea. They said, you know, there's been no discussion on this budget. They continue to And then Representative Lang gave this big speech saying, whether you had 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, you would all vote no on
Probably
this
right.
budget.
You're right.
And then, this is where it got a little crazy, because then it went to another representative who used a procedural motion to send it back to the chair, and then all of a sudden, despite there were dozens of Republicans who wanted to speak against the bill, they called the bill immediately for a vote. They voted as quickly as I've ever seen a vote happen, and then they adjourned immediately after. And you had all these Republicans shouting from their side of the floor. They wanted a verification vote. They couldn't get it. They wanted to hold the chamber open. They couldn't do it. And then you suddenly see all the rule books come out on the Republican side. All of a sudden, they are all, trying to figure out what's going on, what just happened.
That almost makes it sound studious, except for it was, some people brought out the rule books. I saw at least one legislator, she was pounding. I'm sorry if that really hurt your ears there, but she was hurting mine. I'm pounding on the desks and people yelling and screaming. It was like a British Parliament sort of situation, and then Democrats yelling back, and it was just pandemonium.
Representative Sandak walked up to the chair, tried to get an explanation for what happened, and I guess didn't get what he wanted, because he just shouted, "So this is how it works now." And
yep.
Yep. And the Democrats walked away from that. The Republicans had a huge protest on the stairs of the Capitol that evening.
All of the House Republicans standing en masse together, a united front, saying, "We're glad that you saw this. This is what we go through as a minority party. Our local voters sent us here. We matter just as much as Democrats." Democrats did apologize somewhat on Thursday. Both sides really said they each took ownership for getting out of hand, and that was why the vote was rerun. But nonetheless, Democrats saying, if you want to be in power, you want to be in charge, Bruce Rauner wants to get his way, you got to elect more Republicans to the General Assembly, which I guess gets us back to why November is so important.
Yeah, that sort of thing doesn't bode well for whatever. It's not. It may be a grand something, but not compromise. I don't think. I mean,
a grand mess.
Well, grand a lot of things, but the thing is, we're 11 months. We're into this one. We're right around the corner from a new fiscal year, and they're this far apart that there's. I mean, it doesn't.
So no way do you think this budget is going to be a reality?
No, and I think that that sort of pandemonium might at least lay bare the emotions and the frustration that is there, because it does seem on some level so ridiculous, that these are grown people that are elected, going into it with the knowledge, or they shouldn't have the knowledge, that you don't always get your way in a democracy. Democracy is about give and take and that sort of thing, and they're so far from that, And I think that there was some promise, or at least there was an air that, a few weeks ago when these working groups were getting together, and that might have been, who knows, in retrospect, maybe it was media hype, but there was at least some sort of feeling that geez, maybe this will get solved, and that seems to me to be gone now, and so this sort of a passage of a doomed budget is evidence of that.
And it hasn't even gone to the Senate. Do you think it'll succeed there? There are more than enough Democrats there.
There are more than enough Democrats. You would think that if this is I again go back to the representative who said this is our last, our nuclear option. They would rather see something that's worked on together and passed. But I do think if we get to May 31st and nothing has happened, nothing new has come out, I think the Democrats are ready to pass this budget, send it to the governor and say, your move. I think that this was a preview, and I think there's a reason why they did this, because I said, why do this now? It's Wednesday, you got 5 or 6 days left. Why poke the lion right now? And I think it's because they're saying to the governor, this is what you're going to get if we don't get something more balanced, if we don't get something from you that says we're going to come to some real deal. This is what's coming to your desk, not that nice, 17 bill budget that you got last year. Because I think he really did. I think Bruce Rauner got a real break last year when they divided into all those bills, and he had the option of really kind of picking and choosing. He could have kept the MAP grants just as they were, because that was a separate bill, but he vetoed that entirely, even though that's what Governor Rauner had asked for in his budget, And so I think now we've got the Democrats saying, okay, this is what we're going to give you if you can't give us something better.
And finally, and then we'll move on from the budget here and maybe talk about, plenty of other bills under the Capitol dome. So I did go on Thursday morning. The governor had one of these business roundtables. He either likes to go to schools, visit them frequently, bringing attention to that issue, despite not having an education funding formula proposal of his own. And then he also likes to talk a lot with business leaders. And so he met with Springfield area business owners at Wiley Office Furniture. And while you did hear talk about overburdensome regulations and workers' compensation, what the resounding message from these business leaders was instability. And granted, they are based in the capital city, so maybe these aren't totally representative of the state at large, but they said, what is hurting us is a lack of budget. Is it time for Rauner or Madigan, either side, to fold, or is it just too late, trust is gone, and we're never getting out of here?
Well, yes, of course, it's time for both of them to fold. And if there, maybe there is a silver lining. They had this thing on Wednesday where the House passes a budget and all this discord because there's still a few days left in the session. Maybe, fingers crossed, there can be get it out of your system. Maybe there could be a calm after the storm where folks can sit down and say, okay, maybe we can salvage something out of this. But then, this leaders meeting today that you folks went to, that was the time, I think the Republicans wanted that sort of thing, and but just willing it and saying the right things doesn't make it happen.
Well, and I think, talking about instability, there's a great diner here called Charlie Parker's, and I've met with the owner, Mike Murphy, a lot, and he said to us in a story a few weeks ago, the workers' comp regulations, I'd like to see that better. I'd like to see, he said, if I don't know what state government's going to do, then that's really the big problem, and to not know on a year-to-year basis what he's like, if you're going to make an income tax increase, then make it. But, to live in this world where it's a threat, but it's never there, and you don't know what's going to happen, it's really hard as a business owner to, plan for that. I will also want to add about the working groups.
Yes.
I talked to a couple insiders in the Capitol, and they don't think the working groups, are going to be ultimately the people that solve it. The working groups look good on camera, they look good to everybody, but really, as it has always been for these last 11 months, they say it's a matter of getting the governor and Speaker Madigan, the real working group, to talk to each other and say, listen, what are you actually willing to give me, and what are you actually willing to give me, and let's just do it.
Yeah. Another interesting point, I think, I talked to a Democrat who said, we're a democracy, enough of this happening in closed doors, and you have, I think, maybe fault again on both sides where Democrats do refuse to call Republicans' bills at all, even the ones that won't pass, but also no subject matter hearings and kind of unwillingness on the governor's part to lay these issues bare in open public forum. It's all behind closed doors, negotiations going on, which can be a better setting sometimes when you get into the nitty-gritty, but these are significant changes and haven't been out to bear, right?
Yeah. Well, Madigan doesn't do his best work in a glass house. And so, and you're exactly right. Working sounds good, I think, because it has the word working in it. Otherwise you're just, you're
nothing groups?
Yeah, otherwise they're just groups.
What can we rename them?
Yeah.
All right, so more Illinois history. It is not always anything to be proud of when it comes to corruption and public officials under scrutiny. It turns out that Illinois' Auditor General, yes, is under investigation. So, Bruce Rushton, this is a story that you've really ran with and covered. What is up with Frank Montino?
Well, Frank Montino, in response to a story we published about a week ago now, has admitted that, yes, he's acknowledged that he is under investigation by the U.S. Attorney's Office here in Springfield. And that means a few things. Number one, it explains perfectly why he has not said anything in terms of inquiries by the the state elections board and GOP legislators who are demanding that he produce records, or anybody else. Explains why he's hired a spokesman. You can't be a spokesperson can't incriminate the person who hires him. It explains again the lack of the records that have been forthcoming on the elections board. Keep in mind what we're talking about here.
Can you trace his back from history?
He's got some campaign contributions that look a bit questionable and some spending. Well, it's not the contributions per se that are questionable. It's how he spent the money. And he spent in excess of $200,000 at the same service station in a little more than about 11 years. And a lot of it was in round figures. I paid $1,000, then I paid $2,000, then I paid $1,500. How often you hit the gas pump? That exactly. And this was supposedly for gasoline and for vehicle repairs. And so there's
So first of all, round number. Second of all, how possibly do you have that much in car repairs and Yes.
I'd get a new car. I mean,
It roughly adds to about $18,000 a year when you average it. So
it's
it's like,
$54 a day every day at the same place for a decade. Think
So
about
what,
that.
is that him giving money to the owner? Is it filtering? What do you
We have no
suspect?
idea whether he was. I don't really suspect anything. I mean, all I can see and all anybody can see is what he's reported in his disclosure forms. So he's got that issue. I mean, maybe he just drives bad cars and pumps expensive gas. We don't know. But he's also got an issue with Spring Valley City Bank, which he's reported tens of thousands, if not hundreds, well, the six figures I think over the years, for expenditures that have nothing whatsoever to do with banking. He would say he's paid the bank $400 for parking in Chicago. Well, the bank doesn't own a parking garage. He would say that he spent money for travel expenses that he paid to the bank. Well, the bank doesn't run a travel agency. And so the Board of Elections has asked, we want a little more detail here on, particularly with regard to the bank. And that effort was begun even before somebody filed a complaint about the service station. And so the Board of Elections has given Mr. Matino until July 1st to amend his reports. The question is he going to do that? And if he doesn't do that, what can the Elections Board do to him? He is alleging that the Election Board has no jurisdiction over me. I'm not, my campaign fund is done. Well, now he's got this dual investigation going on. He's got the Election Board and he's got the U.S. Attorney's Office. And
I'd be a lot more worried about the latter.
yes, you should be more worried if you were in anybody's shoes. And so, presumably the attorney is going to say, you don't, exercise your Fifth Amendment right. Don't produce things that are going to incriminate you. Don't help this investigation at all. And so the more he tells the Election Board, the more he might help the federal investigation. So he should probably maybe, limit very much what he tells the Election Board, which, so that it doesn't give the U.S. attorney anything to go after. It's a mess. And so he can't come out and come quote unquote clean and answer these questions. So what we're left with is a cloud that's going to hang over Frank Matino for a long time because he's caught in something of a catch-22. He can't really, his options to fully cooperate with the Election Board might be limited by this federal investigation that's going on. And so it's not a good situation.
In your story, had reported that some of his prior campaign workers had been subpoenaed.
Yes.
That was why his spokesman came out and basically admitted this investigation was underway, that the U.S. Attorney's Office was looking into it. Were you surprised that he was that forthcoming? Yes, an investigation. I mean, there was room for some of that, I guess, number one. And then number two, either of you, does this mean that the work that now Frank Matino is doing as the Auditor General is questionable? That's something that GOP legislators say, we can't trust these state audits. But, I mean, these audits are done by professional accounting firms. It's not like Matino's there doing the math.
dotting the I's.
Right?
But all he's doing is signing off on them.
But it's like, that when the chief investigator, of investigating state government is under investigation, that's a pretty dark cloud to have hang over, and you have to wonder if it gets worse, whether or not there's going to be some sort of, I'm not sure what the process would be to get him out of that office.
Supposedly, as I understand it, the General Assembly, which installed him for a 10-year term, could remove him in some way, form, or fashion. But what they've got here is that they began with 11 GOP legislators in February, which signed a letter saying, hey, explain yourself. That's now grown to 20 that signed a letter on May 5th. That's still significantly short of even a GOP majority in the General Assembly. There's 47 members.
He's one of their own. He's a former and respected member of the Illinois House.
He was supposedly, he got along with both sides of the aisle. That's what I'm told.
He got a nearly unanimous appointment. 10 people voted against him. So, but now I talk to Republicans, and they think that had any of this been known, because none of this was revealed until after he was appointed, I think that election obviously would have gone, that appointment would have gone a lot differently.
If this had been known, if this had been known prior to the election of 2014, he wouldn't have been reelected. He only won by 336 votes.
Likely would never have been Auditor
We wouldn't
General.
even be here. And so,
we'll see what Frank Matino or whomever else has to audit, and if there will be an actual budget for he or she to look into, depending on what the General Assembly and Governor Bruce Rauner come to terms with by May the 31st. Lots of other legislation at play in the Illinois State Capitol, everything from casinos, tax revenue, fantasy gambling. A lot to talk about next time, but for now, thanks for joining me. I'm NPR Illinois WUIS State House Bureau Chief Amanda Vinicky, joined by Bruce Rushton of the Illinois Times and Matt Porter of WCIA TV. Thanks so much, and catch us on our Facebook page. That's Capitol View Politics.